truth.
It is a truth universally acknowledged.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that one of the greatest mysteries of English literature is what caused Jane Austen to accept and then refuse a proposal of marriage.
Question. Who was Jane Austen engaged to? From what I've read, she was engaged once. Does anyone know to who or why they broke up?
Answer. She was engaged once to a friend of the family called Harris Bigwither in November 1802. He apparently wasn't a very attractive man, but he would have provided security for Jane and her family. She changed her mind overnight and broke off the engagement the next morning. So she was only actually engaged for less than a day. She apparently couldn't bring herself to betray her own principles.
Advice from Jane Austen to her niece Fanny.
My dearest Fanny, anything is to be preferred or endured rather than marrying without affection. If his deficiencies of manner and etc. strike you more than all his good qualities, give him up at once. Your affectionate aunt, J. Austen.
Mr. Collins proposes. Again.
Mr. Collins, recovered from his encounter with Elizabeth Bennet, turned his attentions to her friend, Charlotte. Feeling the importance of achieving a wife before returning to his parsonage, he expressed his love to her at some length.
Charlotte knew he was neither sensible nor agreeable. His society was irksome, and his attraction to her must be imaginary. Still, he would be her husband and would provide for her and protect her from want. She told him yes. The least agreeable circumstance in the business was the need to inform Elizabeth.
Engaged to Mr. Collins? My dear Charlotte, impossible.
Why should you be surprised? I'm 27 and I've never been handsome. I must consider myself lucky.
Charlotte, please. I'm sorry. I wish you all imaginable happiness.
I see what you're feeling, and I hope when you have had time to think it over, you'll be satisfied with what I have done. I'm not romantic. I never was. I'm convinced that my chance of happiness with Mr. Collins is as far as most people can boast on when entering marriage.
Undoubtedly.
Mrs. Bennet complained bitterly.
Indeed, Mr. Bennet, I cannot stand to live to see Charlotte Lucas take my place as mistress of this house.
My dear, let us hope for better things. It is always possible that I will outlive you.
Question. How do you read Pride and Prejudice without getting confused? I've tried reading this book several times and I always get lost by the first chapter.
Answer. I found this chart on Wikipedia which shows the relationships between all the characters. Check this out and see if it helps.
Jane receives another letter from Caroline Bingley.
Mr. Bingley is staying in London for the winter. He's spending more time with Miss Darcy.
Jane stops hoping.
The Bennets receive a visit from Mr. and Mrs. Gardner.
Mr. Gardner is Mrs. Bennet's brother.
Mrs. Gardner invites Jane to visit them in London to help her get over her disappointment about Mr. Bingley.
Mr. Wickham and Elizabeth spend more time together.
Mrs. Gardner warns Elizabeth not to fall in love with Mr. Wickham, for he has no money.
All I can promise you is not to be wishing.
The Gardners take Jane to London.
Charlotte marries Mr. Collins.
Elizabeth promises to visit soon.
Mr. Wickham turns his attentions away from Elizabeth. He begins to court a Miss King. A young woman who has suddenly inherited 10,000 pounds.
Stupid men are the only ones worth knowing. Elizabeth visits Jane in London.
Jane has not seen Mr. Bingley and is deeply disappointed.
Elizabeth leaves Jane to visit Charlotte and Mr. Collins.
Hope that was helpful.
Terrific.
Elizabeth visits Charlotte and Mr. Collins.
Lizzie! Charlotte!
Miss Elizabeth, our pleasure is great at being able to receive you, though yours indeed may be even greater in finding us so comfortably situated.
Indeed.
I invite you to take a stroll in the garden. To work in the garden is one of my most respectable pleasures.
It is a healthful exercise for Mr. Collins, and I encourage it as much as possible.
You will see that we have a fine view of Rosings, where on Sunday you'll have the honor of seeing Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Her hospitality is charming, and we dine at Rosings twice every week.
Lady Catherine is the most attentive neighbor.
Oh, very true, my dear. That is exactly what I say.
Later that day, Elizabeth had the opportunity of seeing Lady Catherine's daughter, Miss de Bourgh, riding by in a phaeton.
An open carriage meant for excursions in good weather.
I like her appearance. She looks sickly and cross. Yes, she would do very well for Mr. Darcy.
Dinner at Rosings.
Lady Catherine, it is my humble pleasure to acquaint you with Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
Your ladyship?
You are welcome at Rosings. I imagine you have not previously been received at an estate such as mine.
The park is quite beautiful.
It is much better worth looking at in the summer.
Lady Catherine's daughter, Mr. Bed, was present as well, but did not speak.
Mr. Collins, have you had the opportunity to put shelves in the upstairs closets as I suggested?
I have, your ladyship. Their success at holding my belongings has proven you right yet again.
But Miss Bennet, how many sisters have you?
4, your ladyship.
Are they older or younger than yourself?
One is older and the rest younger.
Are any likely to be married?
I cannot say, madam.
Do you play and sing, Miss Bennet?
A little.
Sometime or other we shall be happy to hear you. Our instrument is a capital one, probably superior to yours. Do you draw?
No, not at all.
That is very strange. Why did your governess not teach you?
We never had a governess.
No governess? I've never heard of such a thing. You must have been quite neglected.
Compared to some families, perhaps we were. Those of us who wish to learn never lack the means. Those who chose to be idle certainly could.
Upon my word, you give your opinion very decidedly for so young a person.
The first fortnight of Elizabeth's visit soon passed.
As Easter was approaching, Lady Catherine expected the pleasure of a visit from her nephews, Mr. Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Question. How would you describe Colonel Fitzwilliam? I keep looking through the story, but I can't find where it describes him. Anybody know?
Answer. Colonel Fitzwilliam exists only in this section of the book. He exists in part so that Darcy will see Elizabeth admired by many respects, and perhaps to spark his jealousy as well.
Mr. Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam arrived at Rosings. Miss Bennet, I trust all in your family are well.
Yes, thank you. My sister Jane has been in town,
London.
these 3 months. Have you never happened to see her there?
I have never been so fortunate as to meet Miss Bennet in London.
I must say, I find that surprising.
Colonel Fitzwilliam soon seated himself by Elizabeth.
They talk of traveling and staying at home, of new books, and especially of music.
What is it you are saying, Fitzwilliam? What are you telling Miss Bennet? I want to hear what it is.
We are speaking of music, madam.
Oh, then pray speak aloud. Music is of all subjects my delight. There are few in England who have a more true enjoyment of music than I. If I had learnt, I'd have been a great proficient. And so would my daughter, if her health allowed.
Lady Catherine's daughter, Mr. Bed, was present as well, but did not speak.
How does Georgiana get on, Darcy?
My sister plays beautifully.
I'm very glad to hear it. Pray tell her for me that she cannot expect to excel if she does not practice a great deal. No excellence in music is to be achieved without constant practice. I have told Miss Bennet several times.
But you did not say you played. Would you favor me with something now?
Elizabeth obliged him by moving to the pianoforte.
Might I listen as well?
You mean to frighten me, Mr. Darcy, by coming to hear me? But I will not be alarmed. Indeed, you may provoke me to retaliate, and such things may come out that will shock your relations to hear.
I'm not afraid of it.
Pray let me hear what you accuse him of. I should like to know how he behaves among strangers.
Prepare yourself for something very dreadful. The first time I ever saw Mr. Darcy was at a ball, and at this ball, what do you think he did? He danced only 4 dances. I'm sorry to pain you, but it is so. And there was more than one lady in want of a partner. Mr. Darcy, you cannot deny the fact.
I had not at the time known any lady present beyond my own party.
True, and nobody can be ever introduced in a ballroom.
Perhaps I should have sought an introduction, but I am ill qualified to recommend myself to strangers.
Colonel Fitzwilliam, shall we ask Mr. Darcy his reason of this? Why a man of sense and education is ill qualified to recommend himself to strangers?
I can answer your question. It is because he will not give himself the trouble.
I do not have those talents which others possess, of conversing so easily with those whom I have never seen before. I cannot catch their tone of conversation, or appear interested in their concerns as often I have seen done.
My fingers do not play the pianoforte in a masterly manner which I see so many women's do. I've always supposed it to be my own fault, since I would not take the trouble of practicing.
You are perfectly right. You have employed your time much better. No one admitted to the privilege of hearing you play can think anything wanting. We neither of us perform for strangers.
And soon, Lady Catherine's carriage was ready to take them home.
One day soon after, as Elizabeth was rereading an unhappy letter from Jane, she was surprised by Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Miss Elizabeth, I intended shortly to call on you and the Collins at the parsonage.
Do you certainly leave on Saturday?
Yes. if Darcy does not put it off again. But I'm at his disposal, and he arranges the business just as he pleases.
I imagine your cousin brought you with him for the sake of having somebody at his disposal. I wonder why he does not marry and secure a lost inconvenience of that kind. When I met him before, he seemed to have Mr. Bingley for that same purpose.
Mr. Bingley is a great friend of Darcy's.
Oh yes, he takes a prodigious deal of care of him.
Yes, I really believe Darcy does take care of him. Indeed, I have reason to believe Bingley is very much indebted to him.
What is it you mean?
It is a circumstance which Darcy, of course, would not wish to be generally known.
It may depend upon my not mentioning it.
What he told me merely was this, that he congratulated himself on having lately saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage.
Did Mr. Darcy give you his reason for this interference?
I understood that there were some very strong objections against the lady's family.
I do not see what right Mr. Darcy has to determine in directly which manner his friend was to be happy. But as we know none of the particulars, it is not fair to condemn him.
Colonel Fitzwilliam agreed and shortly thereafter excused himself.
Elizabeth, back in her room, thought how Mr. Darcy was the cause of all that Jane had suffered, and still continued to suffer. He had ruined, for a while, every hope of happiness for the most affectionate, generous heart she knew.
She could not bear the thought of seeing Mr. Darcy again that evening. So when Charlotte and Mr. Collins were leaving for dinner at Rosings, she excused herself, saying she was unwell.
She stayed behind, examining all the letters that Jane had written to her from London. In every line, there was an uneasiness, a lack of cheerfulness which had always been there before.
At this moment, she was surprised by the sound of the doorbell. To her amazement, she saw Mr. Darcy walk into the room.
Mr. Darcy's first proposal.
I heard you were unwell and came to wish you were better.
You should not have troubled yourself on my account.
In vain have I struggled. It will not do. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
Mr. Darcy, proposal mug, you must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. Printed on the front and back of this delightful mug. What could be more felicitous than drinking your favorite beverage from such a mug? I've been safe in yours for only $19.99.
I know of no other woman that could make me happy, and I've long held these feelings. Surely you will understand that I've done all in my power to resist them. You must be aware that I would not easily choose to attach myself to your family, but my feelings make it necessary. I have found my love for you impossible to conquer, and I hope it will now be rewarded by your acceptance of my hand in marriage.
In such cases as this, it is the established mode to express a sense of obligation for the sentiments avowed. If I could feel gratitude, I would now thank you, but I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly. I'm sorry to have occasioned pain to anyone, and I hope will be of short duration.
And this is to all the reply that I'm to have the honor of expecting. I might perhaps wish to be informed why, with so little attempt at civility, I am thus rejected. But it is of small importance.
I might as well inquire why you chose to tell me like me against your will, against your reason, and even against your character. But I have other provocations you know I have. Do you think I can accept the man who has been the means of ruining the happiness of a most beloved sister? Can you deny that you've done it?
I have no wish of denying that I've done everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister, or that I rejoice in my success. Towards him I have been kinder than towards myself.
But my opinion of your character was decided many months earlier, when I learned of your treatment of Mr. Wickham. On this subject, what can you have to say?
You take an eager interest in that gentleman's
You
concerns.
feel his misfortunes without feeling an interest in him.
His misfortunes! Yes, his misfortunes have been great, indeed.
And of your infliction. You reduced him to poverty, withheld advantages your father intended for him, deprived him the best years of his life. You have done all this.
And this is your opinion of me. I thank you for explaining it so fully. My faults, according to this calculation, are heavy indeed. But perhaps these offenses might have been overlooked, had not your pride been hurt by my honest confession of the scruples that had long held me back. But I am not ashamed of the feelings I have related. Could you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your connections? To congratulate myself on the hope of conditions in life is so decidedly beneath my own.
Mr. Darcy, your words have kindly spared me any concern I might have felt in my refusing you if you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner. From the very beginning of my acquaintance with you, your manners, your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain for the feelings of others were such as to make clear to me your true character. You are the last man in the world I could ever be prevailed on to marry.
You have said quite enough, madam. I now perfectly comprehend your feelings and no need to be ashamed of what mine have been. Forgive me for having taken up so much of your time and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness.
Question. I cannot believe anyone would have the crass insensitivity to think that such a proposal could be accepted. Is it psychologically credible that anyone not in a clinical condition would think that that proposal would work?
The next morning, Elizabeth had not yet recovered from the surprise of what had happened. Walking in the park, she saw Mr. Darcy moving towards her. Before she could retreat, he stepped forward, holding a letter.
I have been walking in the grove for some time with the hope of meeting you. Will you do me the honor of reading this letter?
With a slight bow, he turned again, and was soon out of sight. Elizabeth opened the letter and found it to be dated 8 o'clock that morning.
Question. I don't understand everything about the letter. Did Darcy say that he didn't like Jane and Bingley together because he didn't think Jane loved Bingley?
You got it right. Remember earlier in the book, Charlotte Lucas was telling Elizabeth that Jane ought to try harder to secure Bingley. But Jane isn't the type of girl to fawn all over him. So it appeared to Darcy that while Jane liked Bingley, she wasn't head over heels in love with him. Of course, Darcy's main reason for separating them was Jane's objectionable family. Mainly her mother and younger sisters.
Pardon me. It pains me to offend you.
But, as he tells Elizabeth in the letter, he didn't feel guilty about it because he wasn't convinced that Jane really loved Bingley anyway.
Also, did Darcy write that Wickham blew all his money and went to Darcy begging for more and then started chasing after Darcy's sister just so he could get money?
Right. Darcy's father had intended Wickham go into clergy and had left him money for tuition. But Wickham wasn't into it. He took the money and blew it gambling and drinking and messing around with women.
This must be false.
I must now mention events which I would wish to forget myself.
Once the money was gone, Wickham went after Darcy's sister, Georgiana. If he could get her to elope with him, he would have control over her inheritance and her income.
She was then but 15. Regard for my sister prevented any public exposure of Mr. Wickham.
This cannot be.
Wickham told a complete lie. And Darcy just wanted Elizabeth to have the right story.
Got it. Thanks.
For the truth of everything here related, I can refer you to the testimony of Colonel Fitzwilliam. I will only add, God bless you, Fitzwilliam Darcy.
Elizabeth hastily put the letter away. In half a minute, she opened it again and read on. She was struck now by the impropriety of Mr. Wickham's revealing so much to her. She remembered what Wickham had said.
It is not for me to be driven away by Mr. Darcy. If he wishes to avoid seeing me, he must go.
And yet he avoided the Netherfield ball. How differently does everything now appear? How despicably I've acted and how humiliating is the discovery. Had I been in love, I could not have been more blind. Till this moment, I never knew myself.
Back at Longbourn.
Elizabeth and Jane return to Longbourn, where their sister Lydia
In the novel, she elopes with Wickham.
tells them that the regiment is to be leaving Meryton and is planning to be encamped in Brighton.
I do so want Papa to take us all there for the summer. Oh, and I've got more news for you about a certain person that we all like. It is about dear Wickham. Miss King has left for Liverpool, so there's no danger of Wickham's marrying her.
The next morning, Elizabeth told Jane of Mr. Darcy's proposal and of her own response.
His being so sure of succeeding was wrong, but consider how much it must increase his disappointment.
Indeed, I am sorry for him. You do not blame me, however, for refusing him?
Blame you? Oh no. But I do not know when I have been more shocked. Wickham's so very bad, it is almost past belief. And poor Mr. Darcy.
There certainly was some great mismanagement in the education of those two young men. One has got all the goodness, the other all the appearance of it.
I never thought Mr. Darcy so deficient in the appearance of it as you did.
And yet I'm meant to be uncommonly clever, taking so decided a dislike to him, without any reason.
And will you expose Wickham?
I believe I must not to protect Mr. Darcy's sister. Wickham will be gone soon. He can do no more harm here.
You are quite right. He is now perhaps sorry for what he has done and anxious to re-establish his character.
Elizabeth did not relate the other half of Mr. Darcy's letter, nor explain to her sister how sincerely she'd been valued by Mr. Bingley.
Well, Lizzie, what is your opinion now of the sad business of Jane's? I'm determined never to speak of it again. I told my sister so the other day. Mr. Bingley is a most undeserving young man. I do not suppose he will return to Netherfield this summer.
I do not believe he will ever live at Netherfield again.
Well, my comfort is, I'm sure that Jane will die of a broken heart, and then he will be sorry for what he has done.
Elizabeth made no answer.
Mama! I'm going to Brighton! The Colonel and Mrs. Forster have invited me to join them. Papa said yes already. Now I'm going to spend the summer with the regiment.
Oh, Lydia, perhaps one of my daughters will yet find a husband.
Oh, Mama, I would so love to be married to an officer!
Papa, you cannot let Lydia go to Brighton. Think of her behavior and the temptations there.
Lydia would never be easy till she's exposed herself in some public place or other, and we can never expect her to do it with so little expense or inconvenience to her families under the present circumstances.
Indeed, you are mistaken. Lydia is at 16 the most determined flirt that has ever made herself and her family ridiculous. Do you not suppose she will not be an embarrassment wherever she is known, and that Jane and I will not be disgraced as well?
My love, wherever you or Jane are known, you must be respected and valued. Let Lydia go. She is luckily too poor to be an object of freight at the offices at Brighton. Let us hope that her being there may teach her her own insignificance.
With this answer, Elizabeth was forced to be content.
This summary of Pride and Prejudice has been written for kids and young people. If you find the main summary too difficult, then try this instead. It should be okay if you're older than 10, or younger if you're really smart. Elizabeth visits the north of England with her aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner. They go to Pemberley. Pemberley is Mr. Darcy's big, beautiful house in Derbyshire.
Perhaps you could visit Pemberley without me.
Lizzie, would not you want to visit a place which you have had so much? I'm assured the family is away in London. You should have no risk of meeting Mr. Darcy.
Mr. Darcy's housekeeper gives them a tour of Pemberley and says that he is a kind man.
This fine account of him is not quite consistent with what we have had and seen, is it, Lizzie?
Perhaps we might be deceived.
Mr. Darcy returns to Pemberley, surprising Elizabeth.
Movie quotes from Pride and Prejudice, 1940.
I thought you were in London, Mr. Darcy.
Oh, yes.
Movie quotes from Pride and Prejudice, 1995 miniseries.
With Colin Firth.
I thought you were in London.
Miss Bennet,
I did not expect to see you, sir. We understood your family were from home, otherwise we should have never.
I've returned a day early.
Movie quotes from Pride and Prejudice, 2005.
I thought you were in London.
No. No, I'm not.
Your house is charming, and the grounds.
Will you do me the honor of introducing me to your friends?
Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, my uncle and aunt.
It is my pleasure to meet your relations. You are very welcome at Pemberley.
We did not expect to find you here.
Indeed, it is my good fortune that I have come back a day earlier than planned.
You must take great satisfaction always in returning to so beautiful a setting.
You are very kind to say so. There are indeed many pleasures for me here, and you have added to them with your visit.
Your housekeeper was kind enough to give us a tour of the house, and we were just now admiring the stream.
Do you fish often?
I do indeed, when the opportunity arises.
Then you must fish here as much as you choose while you're in the neighborhood. I can easily supply you with tackle and point to you where you'll find the most sport. Miss Elizabeth, will you allow me, or do I ask too much, to introduce my sister to your acquaintances during their stay?
Why, of course.
She joins me along with others whom you know, Mr. Bingley and his sisters. Shall we take a walk into the house?
Thank you, but I believe my aunt and uncle are ready to return to their lodgings.
Then I take my leave until tomorrow.
Until tomorrow.
He is perfectly well behaved, polite and unassuming.
How can you tell us he was so disagreeable?
I've never seen him so pleasant as this morning. I don't know how to explain it.
Study questions for Elizabeth's visit to Pemberley. Number 1. When Elizabeth visits Pemberley Estate, she is surprised by Darcy's behavior. What does she think caused the sudden change in Darcy?
Why is he so altered? It cannot be for my sake that his manners are thus softened. It's impossible that he should still love me.
Number 2. How does Elizabeth feel about Darcy's intentions of introducing his sister? Describe Elizabeth's meeting with Miss Darcy.
Georgiana, allow me to introduce you to Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
My brother has spoken so highly of you that I was almost frightened to meet you.
If he's spoken well of me, it is more than I have earned.
You should not say so.
I hope you will visit us often during your stay.
Number 3. When Elizabeth meets Mr. Bingley, she detects some hints that he might still be thinking of Jane. What are those hints?
How wonderful it is to see you again! It is a very long time since I've had the pleasure of seeing you and your sister.
Yes, you can.
Oh, it is above 8 months I've not met with Miss Jane Bennet. Since the 26th of November, we were all dancing together in Netherfield.
Mr. Bingley, I am ashamed to find your memory so exact.
Number 4. Describe Elizabeth's meeting with Caroline Bingley.
Miss Elizabeth Bennet, how unexpected to discover you here. Your family are unchanged.
Indeed, we are all precisely as we were, neither better nor worse.
Number 5. How does Caroline Bingley behave toward Darcy after seeing Elizabeth?
How ill Miss Elizabeth Bennet looks this morning, Mr. Darcy. She has grown so brown and coarse.
I perceive no other alteration on her than being tanned, an expected consequence in traveling during the summer.
For my own part, I must confess I never could see any beauty in her. I recall you did not find her beauty either when we first met her at Netherfield.
Yes, but that was when I first knew her. For many months now, I've considered Miss Bennet to be the handsomest woman of my acquaintance.
Number 6. How does Elizabeth feel about Darcy after spending more time with him? Can gratitude, esteem, and respect be a good foundation of love?
I do not hate him. No, hatred vanished long ago. I'm ashamed ever to have felt it. Respect, yes, and esteem, but more gratitude. He has loved me. He loves me still well enough to forgive the manner in which I rejected him. Such a change in a man of so much pride. If he could change so, might I?
A letter comes from Jane.
Might I?
A letter comes from Jane.
My uncle! Where's my uncle?
Good afternoon, Miss Bennet.
I beg your pardon, but I must find Mr. Garner this moment.
What is the matter? I will not detain you a moment, but let the servant find Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner. You are not well enough to go.
Lizzie, what is it?
What is the matter, child?
A glass of wine. Shall I get you one? You are very ill.
No, I thank you. I'm only distressed by some dreadful news from Longbourn.
What is it, Lizzie?
I've just had a letter from Jane. Lydia has left all her friends, has eloped with Mr. Wickham. They've gone off together from Brighton. Mr. Darcy, you know him too well to doubt the rest. She has no money, no connections, nothing that can tempt him into marrying her. She's lost forever.
Is it absolutely certain?
Oh, yes. They left Sunday night. They were traced almost to London.
What has been attempted to recover her?
My father has gone to London, but nothing can be done. How is such a man to be worked on? Had I explained but some part of what I knew, but it's too late now.
I wish that I could say or do anything that might offer you consolation, but I won't torment you with my vain wishes. This unfortunate affair will also prevent my sisters having the pleasure of seeing you at Pemberley today.
Be so kind as to apologize to Miss Darcy for me. Say that urgent business called us home immediately, but please conceal the truth as long as possible.
Of course. Let us hope for a happier conclusion than we may now expect. I wish you safe journey home to Longbourn.
Elizabeth returns to Longbourn.
Thank goodness you are home. Jane, has anything been heard of Lydia and Mr. Wickham?
No, not yet.
Is our father in town? London.
Yes, he went on Tuesday.
And our mother, how is she?
She is tolerably well, though her spirits are greatly shaken.
Oh, Lizzie, if I'd been able to go to Brighton, this would not have happened. But poor Lydia had nobody to take care of her. She's not the kind of girl to do such a thing if she'd been well looked after. And Mr. Bennet will fight Mr. Wickham be killed. And what's become of us all? The Collinses will surely set us up before your father is cold in his grave.
Question. Can someone explain to me about Lydia and Wickham? Why'd they run off together if he didn't want to marry her, and why'd the Finley freak out about it?
Answer. Basically, Wickham made Lydia think that he loved her and was going to marry her so that she would have sex with him. If she were to have come back unmarried, she would have been shunned from society and brought shame on her family.
A letter comes from London.
Papa, what news? Have you heard from Uncle Gardner?
Yes, I've had a letter from him. He has found Lydia and Mr. Wickham.
Are they to be married?
Your uncle tells me that if I can assure a living of £100, Wickham will marry her.
Is it possible they are to marry?
Or perhaps Wickham is not so undeserving as we have thought him.
Yes, they must marry, but I don't know how I'll ever repay your uncle, for he must have paid Wickham a great deal more.
What do you mean?
I mean that no man in his senses would marry Lydia on so slight a temptation as £100 a year.
Is there news?
Tell her if you like. I must go answer your uncle's letter.
Mr. Wickham is to marry Lydia.
Oh, how lovely this is! Oh, she'll be married at 16! Oh, how I long to see her and dear Wickham too!
And for this we ought to be thankful. Small is their chance of happiness, as wretched as his character, we are forced to rejoice.
We will all have a bowl of punch to make merry at her wedding.
I wish I had never let Mr. Darcy know of our fears for Lydia.
Why, Lizzie?
Now that they are to be married, perhaps we may be able to conceal the elopement.
But surely Mr. Darcy would keep the knowledge to himself.
I do not doubt his secrecy. But now that he knows what Lydia has done, he will never willingly connect himself to Mr. Wickham. Who can blame him?
But how can that matter to you? You have already made it clear to him that he does not suit you.
Jane, Mr. Darcy is exactly the man who would most suit me. He is unlike me, and he answers all my wishes. But now that Wickham and Lydia are to be married, Darcy and I never will.
Want to test your knowledge on Pride and Prejudice? Question 1. What secret does Lydia reveal about who attended her wedding?
Well, Lizzie, no one was more surprised than I when Mr. Darcy appeared as our witness.
Mr. Darcy!
Oh, yes, he was there with my dear Wickham. Oh, gracious me, I ought to have not said a word about it. It was to be such a secret.
If it is to be secret, then speak not another word on the subject. I will ask no questions.
Question 2. To learn why Darcy attended Lydia's wedding, who does Elizabeth go to for help?
To be ignorant on such a point was impossible. Elizabeth wrote to her aunt, Miss Gardner, in hope of an explanation.
Question 3. What does Mrs. Gardner reveal to Elizabeth about Darcy's involvement in Lydia's marriage? Okay, the truth is this is my homework. I've been on sick with the flu the past 4 days and I have a ton of makeup work to do. And it's all due tomorrow. If anyone could please help me, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Mrs. Gardner tells Elizabeth that it was Darcy who found Lydia in London. And it was Darcy who negotiated the terms of her marriage. He even paid Wickham off himself.
Thank you.
Mr. Bennet, have you heard Mr. Bingley has returned to Netherfield? You will wait on him, of course.
No, you forced me into visiting him last year and promised if I went to see him, he should marry one of my daughters. I will not be sent on a fool's errand again.
But it will be abundantly rude if you do not wait on him.
He knows where we live.
I'm sorry that he has come at all. For myself, I must confess I could see him with nearly perfect indifference, but I could hardly bear to hear thus perpetually talked of.
He has come! Mr. Bingley has come! And who is that with him? Mr. Darcy? Well, any friend of Bingley's is welcome here, although I must say I hate the very sight of him.
Mrs. Bennet, I do hope you will pardon our arriving unannounced.
It has been a long time, Mr. Bingley, since you went away.
Indeed, Mrs. Bennet, this has been too long a time.